"Get out of my boardroom. You're senile." Those words still rang in my ears. My son spat them at me in front of investors. I was 65. I looked at his $50 billion merger and calmly said, "Have fun." The next day, the bankers rushed into his office, pale and shaking. "You idiot," one of them said. "Your mother owns 51% of the voting shares. She just vetoed the deal and fired the entire board." My son froze. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end." I never imagined the boardroom I helped design would become the place where I was publicly destroyed. The long mahogany table shined under the harsh lights. I had sat there for 23 years, but that day felt different. The air conditioner hummed. The smell of coffee made my stomach turn. Keith stood at the head of the table. My son, CEO of Sterling Solutions, the company I started in my garage 43 years ago. At 41, he looked every bit the powerful executive. Perfect suit, confident posture. But the way he looked at me made my chest tighten. "Gentlemen," Keith said to the investors and board members, "before we finalize the $50 billion merger with Morrison Industries, I need to address an uncomfortable issue." My hands tightened on my chair. Roger Whitman leaned back with a smirk. He'd always treated me like I was past my time. Frank Morrison sat beside him, clearly impatient. "As you know," Keith continued, looking at me with fake sympathy, "my mother has been struggling to keep up with modern business." I tried to speak, but he raised his hand. "Please, Mother, let me finish." "Not Mom. Not Renee. Mother. She's been confused about company operations," he said. "Yesterday she suggested we reconsider the merger price. She doesn't understand that $50 billion is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." My face burned. I wasn't confused. I had read the fine print. The deal would destroy employee pensions and profit sharing, programs I spent decades protecting. "Keith," I said quietly, "we should discuss this privately." Roger laughed. "See? She still thinks she has a say." Keith smiled politely. "Change is hard at your age. Cognitive decline is normal. But this merger is happening with or without your approval." I whispered, "I built this company." "No," he replied coldly. "You started something small. I built this into a $50 billion corporation." The room went silent. "Get out of my boardroom," Keith said. "You're senile and embarrassing everyone." I stood up slowly. Not weak. Not confused. Betrayed. This was my son. The child I raised. The future I believed in. "Security will escort you out," he said. Roger looked pleased. Frank looked relieved. I picked up my purse and walked out. The grandfather clock I brought from home ticked loudly. At the door I turned back. Keith was already explaining merger timelines, as if I didn't exist. "Have fun," I said quietly. Something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe. The elevator ride down felt endless. I looked at my reflection. Silver hair. Navy blazer. Tired, heartbroken, but not senile. Outside, the city went on like nothing had happened. I sat in my car. My phone buzzed. Janet texted to say she was sorry. I didn't reply. Keith thought he'd won. But as I pulled into my driveway, I smiled. There was something he didn't know. That night, I sat in my home office. Thomas's old briefcase lay open. Business plans, notes, memories. The grandfather clock ticked. I poured a cup of Earl Grey into the rose-patterned china cup Keith gave me when he was 7. "For the best mommy in the world," the card had said, written in his crooked little handwriting. I stared at it and whispered, "Where did that little boy go?" I opened my laptop and pulled up the company files I had been reviewing for weeks. Not the polished reports Keith showed the board, but the real numbers. The ones that showed exactly what this merger would cost our employees. Before going further, I needed to remember why I was fighting. The photo album lay open beside my laptop. For decades of memories filled its pages. There was Keith at 6 months old, sleeping peacefully in his crib while I worked late at my desk. Clients always asked to speak to the man in charge. They never imagined the quiet woman taking notes was the founder. I turned to a photo from 1985. I stood in front of our garage, pregnant with Keith, holding the first contract that changed our lives. Johnson Manufacturing. 6 months. $25,000. Felt like a fortune. Thomas had wrapped his arms around me that day. "You're going to build something amazing, Renee," he said. "This baby will grow up knowing his mother can do anything." The memory hurt more than I expected. I flipped through more pages. Keith as a toddler playing with toy trucks in my office. Keith as a teenager rolling his eyes at my advice. There were gaps in the photos. Years when I was traveling too much, working too hard, surviving instead of living. Those gaps told their own story. The merger documents on my desk told another. Morrison Industries wanted our clients and our patents. They were paying $50 billion, but buried in the details were clauses that would end employee profit sharing within 6 months. The pension fund would be restructured. Polite word for destroyed. These weren't numbers. They were people. Janet's retirement. Henry's daughter's college fund. Maria's dream of buying her first home. Keith knew. I had highlighted those sections and left them on his desk 2 weeks earlier with a note asking to talk. He never replied. My phone buzzed. "Janet, I found something you need to see. Can I come by?" 20 minutes later, Janet sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her face was tight with worry. She had been with the company for 15 years and knew everything. "I wasn't supposed to see this," she said, sliding a folder toward me. Keith left his computer unlocked. Inside were emails between Keith and Roger, dated over the last 3 months. My chest tightened as I read. "We need to accelerate Mother's removal from company involvement. Her questions are becoming a problem." Agreed. We should consider conservatorship. At her age, diminished capacity would be easy to establish. Not yet. Public embarrassment may work better. Smart. She's always been too proud. My vision blurred. "There's more," Janet said softly. Page 3. An email to a real estate agent. "Prepare market analysis for 15 Maple Grove Lane. Likely quick sale within 60 days of merger completion. My house." I looked up at Janet. "Has Keith said what he thinks will happen to me after the merger?" She hesitated. "He's been telling people you'll move into an assisted living facility. Somewhere safe." The truth settled in fully. Keith wasn't just removing me from the company. He was erasing me. The merger would fund a future where I was locked away, quiet, invisible. "Mrs. Sterling," Janet said carefully, "there has to be something you can do. This company is yours." I looked at Thomas's old briefcase in the corner. I remembered the night he died. Cancer took him quickly, but he lived long enough to see the company go public. I held his hand as he made me promise. "Protect what we built," he whispered, "and protect yourself. Keith is young. Don't let him destroy everything." What I sacrificed came rushing back. Missed school plays, canceled vacations, nights working until dawn while Keith slept. I believed it was all worth it. Instead, he saw my sacrifice as weakness. "Janet," I said, "I need you to do something, and it must stay between us." She leaned forward. "Call Margaret Davidson. Tell her I need to see her tomorrow morning." Margaret had been my lawyer for 20 years. She also knew about documents Thomas insisted on creating before he died. Documents Keith had never seen. "Should I tell her why?" Janet asked. I smiled. This time it wasn't quiet or sad. "Tell her it's time to remind my son that his mother isn't as helpless as he thinks." After Janet left, the house felt different. Less like a home, more like a place under attack. I walked through each room. The living room where Keith took his first steps. The kitchen where I helped with homework during conference calls. The garden where we planted roses together. Keith thought he could erase all of it. Tomorrow, Margaret and I would show him how wrong he was. Margaret Davidson's office looked exactly the same as it had for 20 years. Burgundy leather chairs. Walls of law books. The smell of old paper and strong coffee. Margaret sat behind her desk, sharp and calm. Her silver hair was pulled back tight. Her glasses hung from a chain. "Renee," she said, pouring coffee. "Janet said this was important." I need to know what power I really have, I said. Not what Keith thinks I have. Margaret raised an eyebrow and walked to the safe in the corner. The heavy door opened slowly. I was wondering when you'd ask, she said, returning with a thick folder. The label read, Sterling Family Trust, Confidential. My heart began to race. Thomas had insisted on creating it before he died. Keith never knew it existed. And now it was time. Margaret placed the folder gently on the desk between us. Renee, she said. Everything Keith believes about control of the company is incomplete. She opened the folder and slid the first document toward me. The Sterling Family Trust was finalized 6 weeks before Thomas passed, she continued. He was very clear. If certain conditions were met, full voting authority would revert to you. I swallowed. What conditions? Margaret adjusted her glasses. If the company attempted a merger or acquisition that endangered employee pensions, profit sharing, or resulted in forced removal of the founder. I let out a slow breath. Keith triggered all of it, she said calmly. Every safeguard your husband built into this trust has now activated. She turned another page. You currently hold 51% of the voting shares. Not symbolically, legally, quietly. My hands trembled slightly as I read. Keith has no idea, I whispered. No, Margaret replied, and neither does the board. Thomas wanted it that way. He knew power works best when it's invisible until it's needed. I leaned back in the chair, memories flooding in. Thomas sitting at the kitchen table late at night, coughing, insisting we prepare for things I didn't want to think about. Me telling him Keith would never turn on me. Thomas looking at me with sad understanding. He loves you, Thomas had said softly. But ambition changes people. Margaret closed the folder. You can veto the merger immediately, she said. You can dissolve the board. You can remove Keith as CEO if you choose. The room felt very still. What happens if I do? I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. The market will panic. Investors will demand answers. Keith's credibility will collapse overnight. I thought of my son, the little boy who once wrote me crooked cards, the man who now planned to lock me away. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. I want accountability. Margaret nodded. Then we proceed carefully. By noon, everything was ready. Margaret sent formal notices to the board and legal counsel. The merger was frozen effective immediately. Emergency meetings were scheduled. Banks were notified. Keith was in a leadership summit 3 states away when the call started. At 2:14 p.m., my phone rang. Mother, Keith said sharply. What is going on? His voice wasn't confident anymore. It was tight, controlled panic. I reviewed the merger, I said calmly, and I vetoed it. You can't do that, he snapped. You don't have. I have 51%, I interrupted. And you know it now. Silence. Where did you get that authority? He demanded. Your father, I replied. He trusted me. Keith's breathing was loud through the phone. You humiliated me, he said, in front of everyone. You humiliated yourself, I answered, and you endangered people who trusted us. This was business, he said. You're making it personal. No, I said softly. You did that when you tried to erase me. Another pause. The board is furious, he said. I fired them, I replied. Effective immediately. He exhaled sharply. You can't be serious. I am, I said. And Keith? Cancel the listing on my house. If you ever try to move me without my consent again, we'll have a very different conversation. His voice dropped. You're destroying everything I built. I closed my eyes. No, I'm protecting what you forgot. I ended the call. The next morning, headlines flooded the financial news. Sterling Solutions merger halted by founder. Board dismissed amid internal power shift. Questions raised about CEO conduct. Keith resigned by the end of the week. Publicly, it was called a mutual decision. Privately, it was inevitable. I returned to the office the following Monday. Janet was waiting at the front desk, tears in her eyes. "Welcome back," she said. The boardroom felt different when I walked in. Quieter. Honest. Employees filled the seats this time. Engineers. Assistants. Managers. People who built the company, not just managed it. "I'm not here to punish," I told them. "I'm here to rebuild trust." Applause filled the room. The pension fund was protected. Profit sharing restored. The merger officially terminated. As for Keith, we met once more. Just the two of us. He looked older. Smaller. "I never wanted this," he said. "I know," I replied. "You wanted control." He looked away. "I loved you," he said quietly. "I loved you too," I answered. "But love doesn't excuse betrayal." He nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't argue. Some wounds don't heal quickly. Some lessons take a lifetime. That evening, I went home, poured myself a cup of Earl Grey, and sat by the window as the sun set over the oak trees. The roses bloomed outside, just as they always had. I wasn't helpless. I never was. And this time, the world finally remembered it. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful. Just quiet in the way a storm leaves silence behind it. Sterling Solutions stabilized quickly. Markets calmed once the truth surfaced. Analysts praised the decision to protect employees. What Keith had called sentimentality turned out to be good business. Clients stayed. Talent stayed. Loyalty returned. I spent most mornings in my home office, not the executive suite. I didn't need the spotlight anymore. I needed clarity. Margaret handled the legal cleanup with her usual precision. Lawsuits were avoided. Non-disclosure agreements were enforced. The board members disappeared one by one, their influence gone as quickly as it had grown. Keith stayed out of sight. I didn't hear from him for almost a month. When his name finally appeared on my phone, I didn't answer right away. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something between grief and relief. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, a letter. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table. "Mom, I don't know how to speak to you anymore, so I'm writing. I told myself I was protecting the company, that you were in the way, that this was just business. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid I would never be you. Afraid that no matter how big the numbers got, I would still be standing in your shadow. I crossed lines I can't uncross. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I see it now." My hands shook as I folded the paper. Seeing it didn't undo it. But it mattered. That night, I pulled the photo album back out. I didn't rush this time. I let myself sit with each page. Each version of us. I realized something then. Keith hadn't just betrayed me. He had been drowning in comparison for years. And I had been too busy surviving to notice. That didn't excuse his choices. But it explained them. A week later, I agreed to meet him. Neutral ground. A quiet cafe near the park. He stood when I walked in. Awkward. Unsure. "Thank you for coming," he said. I nodded and sat down. We didn't order right away. "I'm not here to fix this," I said gently. "I'm here to set boundaries." He nodded quickly. "I understand. You're no longer involved with Sterling Solutions," I continued. "That decision is final." "I know," he said. "You will not make public statements about me or the company." "I won't. And you will seek help," I added. "Real help. Not advisors. Not consultants. A therapist." He looked surprised. Then tired. "I already am," he admitted. That softened something in me. "I don't know what our relationship looks like now," I said. "But it can't be built on control or silence." He swallowed. "I don't expect anything from you." "Good," I said, "because expectation is what broke us." We talked for another hour, carefully, honestly, no raised voices, no accusations, just truth laid out like fragile glass. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said, "not as a CEO, as your son." I didn't hug him, but I didn't turn away either. That was enough for now. Months passed. Sterling Solutions entered a new chapter. We invested internally, promoted people who had grown with the company, expanded responsibly, quietly. I stopped being the founder pushed out by her son and became something else. A reminder. Employees began stopping me in the hallways when I did visit the office. Thank you for